All right, it is time for a new Bitcoin whiteboard video. This one is going to be focusing on the topic of building Bitcoin bridges, particularly in the context of using some sort of ZK verification on Bitcoin to build the bridge. Over the past year and a half, it feels like everybody and their brother in this space is talking about how they're going to build something on Bitcoin, some sort of L2 or rollup or sidechain or bridge, and it's all going to use this one same core primitive, this thing called BitVM. Now, BitVM is like a breakthrough, but if you haven't been following this space very closely, you're probably very confused by what's going on because, we had this BitVM announcement and there was BitVM 1, and then there was BitVM 2, and then more recently there's BitVM 3, and then 3S, and then you have this thing called BitVM X, and now on the very bleeding edge, a lot of teams are being like, look, BitVM as a paradigm is very cool, but BitVM is out, and now we're into this whole thing called Garbled Circuits, or what we at Alpen call Garbled Locks and Glock for short. And so in this video, what I want to do is kind of break it into two parts. One, I want to rehash and redescribe how bridging in Bitcoin works and why some sort of ZK verification, whether we use BitVM or something different, is like a wildly profound development for Bitcoin. And then the second half, I'm going to kind of very high level describe the differences between BitVM 1 and 2 and 3 and Garbled Circuits. And I'm going to try to identify, to the best of my memory, which teams historically are working on which one of these and the names of their implementation. So hopefully I can kind of give a map of the territory a bit, and then everybody can decide, whether they like these ideas or not. So as a quick refresher of the very basics, most people understand that approximately every 10 minutes, Bitcoin miners are mining, searching for a Bitcoin block. If they're selected, they get to create a block where they put transactions into it. They append it into the blockchain, and then they proliferate that out to all the rest of the Bitcoin nodes. And after observing all of the blocks that our nodes have been sent, we create this UTXO set, which is a list of all of the current balances of everybody that holds Bitcoin in the network. And that's, very high level how we come into consensus and everybody agrees who owns what Bitcoin. And so here, I'm going to write UTXO set. Now, next, a lot of people understand that Bitcoin has very limited functionality. Intentionally, we want to keep it kind of lean and not add all this expressivity to Bitcoin. But because of that, there's many people that say, hey, store value is really cool. We get that. That's the core innovation. But I would love to be able to spend my Bitcoin, maybe medium of exchange. I would love to be able to send it with perfect privacy. Maybe they want to use it in DeFi and risk it for yield or borrow against it. There's just so many preferences of people in the world. And so there's always somebody saying, hey, we can build this L2. So we can build this L2 and we can give you that functionality. And the way that every L2 works is conceptually high level, very, very similar. They all take some subset of Bitcoin from the UTXO set. So the people that own Bitcoin on the Bitcoin layer 1, and they're going to lock those funds. So this is some amount of UTXOs right here. They're going to lock these funds, and then they're going to represent that in some sort of L2. Or side system is probably a better way to describe it. And it's important to know that once these funds have been locked and these Bitcoin have been represented over here, whether it's Lightning Network or a sidechain or a rollup or whatever, Bitcoin, our nodes are no longer aware of that. They can no longer recognize and see what is happening on the other side of this bridge. And as I mentioned, that's intentional and we want to keep it that way. But this poses a problem because what if Alice bridges funds over into this kind of side system here? Something happens. She transfers the funds, does some sort of functionality, and now Bob has all of those Bitcoin. Bob is trying to bridge the funds out, but how does Bitcoin actually know that it's a valid withdrawal, that Bob did in fact receive these funds in some valid way from Alice? Well, this is where all the different bridges come in, where there's always some sort of entity or some sort of mechanism right here that somehow is kind of observing or attesting to what happened on this layer 2, and then relaying that information to Bitcoin. And some of these are more secure, something like Lightning Network. Some of them are less secure, but they give different types of functionality. But there's always some sort of thing happening right here that's here is kind of what happened in the L2, and I'm attesting to that. Therefore, Bitcoin honor this withdrawal. And so this entity kind of has like, in some form or fashion, like control over the locked funds. Now, where this potentially changes when it comes to ZK is we can take some sort of L2. Let's just assume for now it's an EVM. This is, what a lot of L2s are, things like rootstock. This is what most of the ZK rollups that people are building are going to be as some sort of like EVM compatible layer 2. And with the magic of zero knowledge proofs, we can take any sort of complexity that happens up here, whether it's just like people transferring money or people building DeFi smart contracts or NFTs or like whatever functionality you can do with the EVM. And you can put that into something called a prover, which happens off-chain. And the prover will generate this thing called a zero knowledge proof. And so some of the entities that can perform this, like maybe you've heard of names like Succinct Labs or Risk Zero, or Starkware can also do proving with something called Stew. Like there's many different companies that can take some sort of layer 2, put it into a prover, and spit out a zero knowledge proof. And this proof has a couple of key properties that I want to mention. I call this like an unforgeable digital receipt. And the properties that it has is, one, it's succinct. Another is that it's valid. And the last one, which this is kind of a concept that I made up here, but I think it'll make sense in a little bit, is called translation. And so what you can think about this unforgeable digital receipt is, it's almost just like, it says something simple like Bob has 5 BTC. The cryptographers are probably going to get mad at me. This isn't technically what's happening, but conceptually, like you're just getting this very succinct, very tiny, super, super compressed piece of data that is provably valid, meaning that if Bob has 4 BTC, this is zero knowledge proof, like it just won't work. Like it always has to be true. And it kind of translates any complexity that happened with the EVM. It translates into like common language of just like Bob has 5 BTC. We don't care if it did Fartcoin, DeFi, NFT. Like we don't care. We just tell us what, tell us how many Bitcoin this person has, and make sure it's true. And so you can then put this zero knowledge proof into this entity. Now we're going to call it a verifier. Okay. And when you put this in, the verifier will essentially assess and say, is this zero knowledge proof true? If yes, then unlock the funds and get them back to Bitcoin L1. If no, throw that withdrawal request in the trash can. Like we're not going to process it. And so in theory, this like gives us this way to do a decentralized bridge to process these withdrawals without some sort of centralized intermediary. And so this is like an insanely powerful concept. Okay, so this setup that I've kind of defined here, this is a high level ZK rollup that could be built on top of Bitcoin. And I'm going to make a quick kind of tangent here and call out all of the critics who are watching this. I know you're watching this, you know who you are. And they'll say, we don't like this setup. We don't think that this is a good scaling way to scale Bitcoin, because maybe they don't like the EVM. It was made by Vitalik, and I don't know, he did a pre-mine or something. And also because like in this setup, there's data, which I didn't mention here, that has to be posted back to the Bitcoin blockchain, and Bitcoin has limited block space, and we don't want to have to post data to the Bitcoin blockchain. Or maybe they say, hey, the entity that's putting these transactions on the EVM in order, it could be one single entity, and we don't like that entity. And all of that is technically true. With that said, even in that setup, this gets us pretty damn good scalability with pretty good functionality. And still, like the sequencer, even though it's one entity, it can't steal funds. It can't lie and process malicious withdrawals because of this whole ZK setup. So the stack I described for the kind of most basic vanilla ZK rollup is still actually like quite secure and quite scalable. But just to kind of appease the critics here so they understand, let's just play something out. We don't have to build EVM here. We can just build like a Bitcoin clone. We can build what I'm going to call bit clone. And maybe this is a Bitcoin chain over here that just has some additional opcodes. You could then build something like Arc on top of that. You could build something like Lightning on top of that. Like you can build things that maybe don't necessarily require one or use one single sequencer that don't actually post significant amounts of data back to the blockchain. Maybe there's a different group of people who say, I don't want the EVM, I don't want Bitclone. They're like, I want privacy. Like I'm a cypherpunk. Well, okay, you could build that. Maybe there's another camp of people who they're just like, they're like, hey, we're degens. Like we want to go leverage long. We want a super high performant chain. We want hyper liquid, you know, hyper liquid right here. Well, okay, you could build that. Maybe you could build, I don't know, like stable coins are really popular right now. You could build like a stable coin chain right here. Stable coin chain. You can build anything. Like the possibilities are endless. It doesn't matter how complex it is, it can be done. It doesn't matter what type of preferences the builder or the user wants, it can be done. So oftentimes when critics kind of oppose this ZK rollup on Bitcoin setup, they're kind of cherry picking one specific implementation. But the reality is like, you can build anything you want. And why this is so cool is if we go back to how this functions. Remember, you could take anything, any sort of computation that happens up here, whether it's EVM or privacy or hyperliquid or Bitclone or stable coins, whatever, and you can put that into a prover and you can compress it and it will spit out this same exact thing right here. It's something that is, no matter how complex it is, it will be very succinct. No matter how complex it is, we can prove the validity, some caveats there, but for the most part true. And then no matter how many different languages and stuff that you're using here, it will translate it into something succinct, like just, okay, Bob has 5 BTC. Cool. I don't care if you got that because of hyperliquid leverage longs or EVM Bob. It's all good. And so really, like, if we can solve this verifier problem, then you're opening up the entire world of Bitcoin without actually changing Bitcoin. That is just like wildly powerful. And like, if we can have all these different things that can speak one succinct language that is truthful, then you can really do some interesting things of like cross composability and maybe even sharing liquidity and like kind of having close to this end game vision of scalability. A lot of that's probably years out, but you know, hopefully conceptually people can see like how important this is. Now, with all of this in mind, like pretty much all of this stuff is technically possible. It's the verifier which is the hardest part to solve. And so in a best case scenario, Bitcoin just had the functionality built in to verify zero knowledge proofs. One way to get that is if we had a soft fork, something like opcat. With cat, we could verify a specific type of zero knowledge proof called Starks, and that would be amazing. Or if we had like op multiply just to perform multiplication, that would allow us to build a zero knowledge proof verifier natively on Bitcoin. If we just had another opcode that was custom built not to do multiplication or not to do cat, literally just to verify zero knowledge proof, that would also work. All of these options I'm supportive of, but we understand that it's very, very difficult to get changes into Bitcoin and, you know, probably won't happen. So really the kind of breakthrough here is a year and a half ago when I think I had mentioned Robin Linus put out this BitVM paper. The long short of it is that you could kind of get Bitcoin to somehow reason about zero knowledge proofs without any sort of soft fork whatsoever. And the way we do that is something called optimistic ZK verification. If we had native ZK verification like opcat or opmultiply, people could bridge funds over into this ecosystem. We compress it into a zero knowledge proof. It gets fed into the verifier. If false, throw it in the trash can and don't process that withdrawal. If true, process it, good to go. In optimistic ZK verification, we bridge funds over, And then users or people can attempt to make withdrawals out. And if nobody's paying attention, the withdrawal will be optimistically assumed to be true and valid. And it will just go through and somebody just stole funds. But with optimistic ZK verification, you can have people that are monitoring this process. And any one person, just one person or one entity can say, hey, this looks fishy, this is fraudulent, I don't trust this. And they can force this ZK verification to essentially play out, which will then have the same end result where if it was honest, if the zero knowledge proof was valid, then unlock the funds. If not, then throw it away. And so that is kind of the paradigm that BitVM opened up. The open research questions was like, well, how do we want to do this ZK verification scheme where you have this one event type setup? Do we want to do it where most of that logic is pushed off chain, but it introduces one set of trade-offs? Do we want to do it where it's on chain, it introduces another set of trade-offs? And there's all these different design decisions of like, is this practical? Is this desirable? But the end result is ultimately, again, like somebody tries to process a withdrawal. We need some way to perform or check that this zero knowledge proof is valid. We're comfortable saying that you only need one honest person to do this. And then that's this kind of bridge. So that is, again, like the whole concept of this world of BitVM that we're getting into. Now I'm going to try to describe like the evolution from all the different instantiations of BitVM. Okay, so BitVM 1 said that we're going to perform some of this ZK verification. We're going to do it off chain. Off chain, which means that it was cheap. And one of the trade-offs is that it's permissioned. And so the way that this would work is somebody is trying to request a withdrawal out, and the party that's and somebody suspects and says, I don't trust this. This doesn't look right to me. And so the party that is trying to bridge something out would provide something off chain, basically like the ZK verification. And then the person that doesn't believe them would say, all right, I want you to provide me 1/2 of this. And then they would say, now I want you to provide half of that. And then I want you to provide me half of that, and so on. And so eventually, you kind of go through this back and forth between the party that's trying to bridge out and the party that is essentially challenging them. And eventually, you kind of cut this in half enough to where you can identify, hey, this is where you are lying and where I'm showing that this proof is not actually valid. So you're going through that process of verifying. Now, this conceptually works, and this is kind of what kicked off the BitVM revolution. The problem is that each time you kind of do this, what's called bisection, or cutting it in half, this is a round that we call it, and each round is like 1 week. Well, in the original BitVM, there was like, I don't know, 30 rounds. Like that's months or close to a year to perform this ZK verification, to perform this kind of arbitration of whether a withdrawal is valid or not. And so we tried to make many optimizations to this to bring that period down. And people that have been following Alpen labs for a while may remember Snarknado. Snarknado was what we had at Alpen. And this brought it down to 4 weeks, to 4 rounds. And we're like, hell yeah, that's not bad. You know, and then I think the BitVM X is based off of BitVM 1, and this was from like Fairgate. I think there was like BitSnark, which was maybe from I think Bitcoin OS. And like there were probably other teams here, but these were kind of like the earliest instantiations of BitVM. Now, a lot of people, I think in hindsight, we got a little bit greedy, and we said, hey, we want something that is permissionless, permissionless, and we want it to be fast. So we don't want to go through all of these rounds. And so we said that we can get it down to 2 weeks if we put things on chain. So if you remember, most of BitVM 1 happens off chain. BitVM 2, some components of it have to happen on chain. And so this means it's potentially very expensive. And many of us said we are comfortable with this trade-off because we will be able to optimize and compress the amount of data that actually has to be posted on chain during a challenge, and that should be good. On top of that, when I say that people are posting data on chain, this would only ever happen if there's some sort of challenge or malicious withdrawal. So if you remember, in this optimistic bridge setup, funds go over, funds can go out, and if there's no fraud, no malicious activity, no like suspicious thing going on, it just optimistically assumes that withdrawal is honest. It's only if there's some sort of weird activity that we need to play out this BitVM game. So when people were thinking about it, they're saying, look, yeah, we have to post on-chain data. We can compress it. It's not even going to be that bad. And very, very rarely are you ever going to have to post this data, if ever. And I think there was pretty good evidence to believe that was true. However, there were a couple of issues with BitVM 2. It was initially assumed that it would be permissionless. And one part of BitVM 2 was actually permissionless, meaning anyone could kind of challenge and say, I think that withdrawal is bad. I'm going to challenge the system. But there were other components that ended up kind of proving to be, it seems like you couldn't get around the permissioned nature of it. So it's not actually fully permissionless. Instead, you're going to have, again, this like set of n operators where maybe this is 10, 15, 20, 50 people. It doesn't matter. But there's some fixed set of people that can actually perform this, this challenging of the BitVM. So not actually permissionless. On top of that, all of these n operators, in order to challenge and say, hey, I think that this is a bullshit withdrawal, they have to put up typically stake. Like they have to put up Bitcoin that if they, challenge or if they submit a bad withdrawal, if they're just lying and deceptive, like the Bitcoin is going to be slashed. Well, the question is like, how much Bitcoin do they actually have to put up as stake? And that is a derivative of the potential on-chain costs to perform a challenge in the future. The long short of this is that it ended up being pretty expensive stake. Not unbearable, but like each operator would probably have to put up, I don't know, like 2 to 5 BTC. 2 to 5, BTC. And then there's just other weird kind of fringe instances where you have to front some sort of money. The point is like the ultimate downfall, if the downfall here is time back in BitVM 1, let's see, on my little clock here. The downfall right here is the cost. Is both of these work, but they probably don't have ideal trade-offs. Now, most of the teams working on this, if you've heard of this thing called the BitVM Alliance. So, like Alpen Labs is in the BitVM Alliance. Seroy is in BitVM Alliance. This is where Robin Linus focused most of his efforts. I think BitLayer's in there, Babylon's in there, Bob is in there, Fiamma's in there. I apologize if I'm forgetting anyone, but this is where most of the efforts over the past year have been focused. I want to circle back very briefly and just say, in hindsight, I think this BitVM 2 will work, but it's probably clunkier and not as efficient as we want. And so I think some teams that are moving forward with this and just trying to go to mainnet, even with this probably less optimal design, I think within the alliance, like I think Seroy is trying to do this. I think BitLayer is trying to do this. maybe some of these other teams. But going back, like I think the one team that really kind of stood strong and said we're not going to go to BitVM 2 is Fairgate Labs, which this is like the rootstock, typically associated with rootstock, like Sergio Lerner and stuff. And I really actually admire them. They like stuck to their guns and said, we don't think that this is going to be an optimal design. We're going to stick with BitVM 1 and BitVM X. So that's kind of the lay of the land of where things stood over the past, let's say 9 to 12 months. Now, over the past few months, there have been some announcements, maybe you've seen them, of this like new magical concept called Garbled Circuits. And Garbled Circuits can potentially get us the best of everything, where we can go back to a BitVM 1 style thing where most of this happens off-chain. So you eliminate those on-chain costs and these kind of inflated staking prices and the economics where you're just like, ugh, like I'm a little uncomfortable with this. You can also get the benefit of it being fast, where it can be 2 weeks, maybe even 1 week to perform this kind of arbitration and challenge. And let's see. And so Garbled Circuits, in theory, like solves pretty much all of our problems. The trade-off that Garbled Circuits has is that even though you don't have on-chain costs, the off-chain costs are potentially, they are like very, very, very ginormous. And by that, I mean the storage costs that you're putting on operators are very, very big. And that makes some of the cryptography side, I'll use words like proving correctness of the garbling table and making it maliciously secure, like those things become very impractical. And so this concept of Garbled Circuits, it's now kind of becoming popular in the past few months, but this is something that even we at Alpen discovered like over a year ago. And we ultimately did not pursue it at that time because of this issue that I'm talking about, where the main metric that we're looking at is called like gates. So when you have a garbled circuit, I'm not going to go into the details. You can chat GPT it if you want. But off-chain, I'm going to draw it up here on the verifier. You have like some sort of circuit. It kind of looks something like a tree structure. And let me draw it out here. And so this circuit represents a ZK verification off-chain. It will take in a zero knowledge proof and then have this desirable property that we wanted, where it will approve a withdrawal if it checks true and throw it in the trash can if not. We're garbling it, which again, like beyond the scope of this whiteboard video. And each one of these kind of triangles here represents what's called like a gate in like a binary circuit. And the more gates that something has, or I should say the more complex that something is, the more gates it has. And the more gates that it has, the worse it is for our purposes. Like the larger the storage costs are, the larger the communication costs are, like the more impractical it is. And so when many of us, or when our team at Alpen looked at Garbled Circuits, we just said, hey, yes, this solves our issues of it being fast and it's cheap. And oh my gosh, it seems like the godsend. It's like, you know, the best thing ever. But it had too many gates. And I think at the time, it was like close to 10 billion gates. And what we now have discovered in the past few months is that other teams also kind of at the same time stumbled across Garbled Circuits. I think, again, the Fairgate Labs team, I think they had been talking about Garbled Circuits for a while. Jeremy Rubin had looked into Garbled Circuits. He published a paper called Del Bragg, which is garbled backwards. And so people were kind of circling on this concept of using Garbled Circuits to build like a better BitVM. But the blocker was always that if you create a garbled circuit out of something called a Groth16 verifier, it's just going to be huge. And I don't think I mentioned this part, but there are different types of zero knowledge proofs. The most popular one is called a Groth16 proof. It's usually the smallest, it's the most battle tested. It's kind of like the standard in many zero knowledge proofs. And so again, if we tried to create a garbled circuit of a Groth16 verifier, you have a huge number of gates. Now, what's happening is people are all hyped up on garbled circuits now over the past few months. And some teams have been able to optimize this down to 2 billion gates. And so this has really been the focus of the BitVM Alliance. So let me say the Alliance here. So yes, some teams are still working on BitVM 2, but really like in this BitVM Alliance thing, which is all those teams that I had mentioned, they're like, how do we optimize this, this Groth 16 verifier? From what I can tell, like maybe there's a path to make it practical, but you build, like if you're in billions of gates, like you're still, it's still probably impractical. So this kind of garbled circuits approach that people are mentioning, like probably doesn't work if we use some sort of Groth 16 verifier. And so this is really like the premise of, if you heard things like BitVM 3 or eventually 3S, you know, BitVM 3 and 3S are trying to do garbled circuits using some sort of Groth 16 verifier. And it's like, it's such fast moving research that it's like, okay, let's throw this idea out there, call it BitVM 3. Okay, that doesn't work, it's broken. Okay, now we have BitVM 3S, but we still have this issue with the gates complexity. Like I think we're hopeful that it will be solved, but it's not clear. So this brings us to like this final approach that I'm going to mention, which is kind of what we are pursuing at Alpen, and really is kind of the brainchild of our chief scientist, Liam Egan. And what Liam kind of determined is, he said there are different types of snarks. Like there's one called a DV snark, or a designated verifier snark, where with a DV snark, it is permissioned, meaning if I have a snark and I set up a DV snark with you, whoever you are on that side of the screen, then only you can verify this snark. You have the private key that only you can go ahead and verify it. If anybody else tried to verify the snark, so we posted a snark here, nobody else would be able to do it. And so DV snarks typically aren't as popular, but in this kind of, as we walk through all of this, if you remember, I kind of mentioned that in BitVM 2, we tried to make this permissionless, but we just acknowledged that we couldn't. And I think most teams would agree with that. And so if you're comfortable relaxing this requirement, and you say, look, we're fine that there is going to be some N amount of people, whether again, it's 15, 20, 25, 50, 100, and we're fine acknowledging that it will be some sort of permission set, but it will be, you know, some of the biggest companies in our entire industry. There will be some anons on there. Like there's probably someone on that list that you can trust. If we're fine with that trade-off, then we can introduce this DV snark. And Liam, who's kind of like a math gigachad, and you know, one of the foremost experts on ZK in the world, kind of took this concept of a DV snark and modified it with some new cryptography. And ultimately, we were able to get the gates down to 12 million. So basically like over 100x improvement of even the best, most optimized version that we currently have of Groth 16. And I mean, I could share more about this DV snark. There is a paper that Liam wrote that should be out there by the time this video goes out. But the point is, now this is actually practical. Like the storage requirements are actually manageable now. The communication, the cryptography side, like all of this is good. The trade-off here is like some people are just less familiar with it. Like there's less tooling. Like Groth 16 is very well understood. So maybe it's just like it's novel. Novelty is the main trade-off that you're taking on here. And right now, I think like this is exclusively coming from our team at Alpen, and this is what we're calling, you know, Glock, short for garbled locks. And so that's pretty much the whole presentation. But I think the point here is that, yes, these designs, a lot of these have changed over time here. But a lot of these components are kind of reusable. And we now feel that we actually have a design that so far looks like it can very cleanly enable us to do this ZK verification for Bitcoin, in particular, this optimistic ZK verification, where as long as you're trusting one of N people, that it will happen. And if we enable this functionality here, then it reopens this whole Bitcoin bridging space that we talked about, where again, it's not just the EVM with like one type of setup with a sequencer. It can be, you know, privacy and stablecoins and leverage and Bitcoin and crazy different languages, and all these things can compose together and they can settle onto Bitcoin. Like this is, I like this term of it makes Bitcoin radically unopinionated money. Don't fuck with Bitcoin, but give people maximum optionality, all of it settle, you know, trustlessly, or, you know, one of n trustlessly back to Bitcoin. So again, hopefully that whiteboard was helpful for people. Let me see if I want to give any more shout outs. I'll also say, let's see, I think another team that's working on Garbled Circuits, aside from the people in the alliance that I had already mentioned, I think is Fairgate, which again are the people kind of behind BitVMX, or this product called Union Bridge. I don't think that they've solved this kind of like the gates issue, but maybe they'll use the DB snark. They have some other creative tricks. Like I want to give shout outs to a lot of people who've contributed to this space. But yeah, this is kind of the state of things. So I hope you enjoyed. Leave some feedback.